I couldn't avoid the reference because this is, as I say, entitled Back of the Net or Over the Crossbar. And Stuart Lawrence is the founder of Mediator Locator. And this is going to be a deep dive into the really important area, and I think growing area, you'll explain, of online mediation. You might even touch on AI and what I was saying in my introduction to the afternoon, where someone in the audience, one of the attendees, was saying that there is a real shift now in terms of AI-generated complaints, and that, for someone who, like her, is in HR, is preoccupying her in a really big way. Welcome to the stage.
Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Matt. You've set the bar very high. A fascinating talk on online mediation, so I'll do my very best to get the volume right, first and foremost. My name's Stuart Lawrence. I'm the founder of Mediator Locator, which is a nationwide panel of mediators working in partnership with law firms. So most of our mediators are lawyer-mediators. We've been operating about 2 years. So I'm going to talk to you about evaluating online mediation back of the net or over the crossbar. I thought I'd theme it a little bit around the World Cup. Some people would be pleased about that, some people perhaps not so pleased. But rest assured, I'm not going to be talking about football, and I'm not going to be talking about Teams or Zooms and the vagaries of those particular platforms. But what I am going to be talking about is judgment. And I think it's really important to understand that there is a place for both online and in-person mediation, and I'd like to reframe the debate a little bit about that. This is a rather impressive grand room, and this is only the second time in my life that I've actually been in this room. The first time was back in 1992 when I sat my bar finals course. I'm a qualified barrister, and I remember coming in this morning and seeing the layout and thinking to myself, my God, I remember when I was here last time, there was all the desks neatly lined up individually with all the pressure and the invigilators. I got through that exam, so hopefully it's a good omen for this afternoon. So, online mediation, back of the net or over the crossbar. I'm just going to quickly start my phone so that we can monitor the time, so I don't overrun. I'd like to start with 2 quick questions, try and make this a little bit interactive. The first one is this: how many of you conduct more than half your mediations online? And if you could show hands, I'd be most grateful. Okay, that's probably less than I thought, actually. I was expecting more. And how many of you believe that mediation online is the preferred format? Perhaps you could raise your hands again. No one wants to raise their hands? No? You all believe, I don't think there's, one person. So not putting you under pressure, why do you believe that, just to be the only person here who does? And for what it's worth, I think you might be right.
I think it's environment. So we work with prisons and probation in the main, but also lots of other government departments. And being able to get around and have access to people, managers aren't in the same location, or those perpetrators aren't always in the same place. So online is often preferred, and there is a control about camera. Okay. And when you show yourself, when you don't show yourself, yeah. How you can take your breaks, how you can have notes with you, and you might have others behind you as well. And sadly, AI. Okay, great. That's a great answer, actually. I put you on the spot there, and you came up trumps. I think the thing is with mediation is one of its core strengths is it's flexible. I mean, you'll all be familiar with the virtues of mediation. It's cheaper, it's quicker, etc. But I think one of its big advantages is it's flexible. And the whole online environment is evidence of that flexibility. It's a process that can adapt to the environment in which it operates. So a little bit of a history lesson. The match has changed. So taking you back to the 20th of March 2020, you probably all remember the time when our Prime Minister came on the TV and said, for the next 3 months, you're all going to be locked down. And you can't go out. Walking was even restricted. I had my teenage son with me, and my biggest fear at that point was I've got to feed him for 3 months. But
it was a real change of the environment, and we had to adapt. And because of that, online mediation became a necessity. And I think for a lot of us who are probably relatively familiar with technology, but perhaps not completely comfortable with the online technology, we just had to adapt. And that's one of the strengths that we all have as intelligent people, is we have the ability to adapt. And we did adapt, and we adapted quite quickly. And I think the technology changed expectations. I think people were nervous. There's all the issues about the breakout rooms. Obviously, within mediation, we have confidentiality, we have without prejudice. These are key fundamental concepts. If you go into the wrong breakout room, you could really cause some damage. You could actually upend the entire mediation. So I know when I was first doing the online mediations, I was pretty anxious. I sort of triple-checked everything. I even did dry runs with family and friends just to make sure that I was getting everybody in the right room. Because if I screwed that up, it could really make a cause a major problem. But I think we probably needn't have been as worried as we were, and in fact we've all adapted to the online environment pretty effectively, and the lady over there thinks it's her preferred format, and I think for a lot of people it is, and for a lot of very good reasons it is. So bringing us up to date, the landscape today. It was interesting, the show of hands showed people didn't have a lot of love for online mediation, but I wonder sometimes whether the convenience of online mediation has become the real driver. And perhaps we're making those decisions to do mediation online not because it's the right solution, but because it's the easy solution. And as I say, I'd like to reframe that debate. Are we choosing online mediation because it works or because it's easy? And I suspect to a large degree there may be reasons that it's just easy. We just do it because it's easy. So the question that I posed at the outset, themed on the World Cup, was back of the net or over the crossbar. And like everything in life, it's not a simple answer. Everything is nuanced. There's never one or another. It's a degree of both. There's always shades of grey, and the answer is nuanced in this environment too. So not every mediation is the same, and not every format is the right fit. And the process needs to adapt to the dispute before you, so that you choose the right process to maximize the prospects of success. A football manager doesn't just use the same tactics. And for those of you that did watch England play, the first match was pretty exciting. 4-2. We had a nice expansive format. Everybody was running around. The goals were good. It was exciting. It was dynamic. Match 2, not so much. The format changed. Ghana, what is the term, parked the bus, and we had a fairly boring match. Thankfully, we didn't lose, but we got through it. And then the match the other day was pretty boring as well. In fact, it started, I think, 10 o'clock at night, and at 10:45 I went to bed. And I woke up in the morning about 6:30 and checked my phone and said, yeah, okay, we got the result we needed, top of the group, and we're through. But you have to adapt your environment to fit the requirements, and that's what good managers do, and that's what good mediators do. There's value in online mediation. You're familiar with a lot of things like international parties. I mean, we do a lot of domestic mediations, but equally we not have a parent company where a representative is based overseas. You might have a situation where you've got a dispute in a commercial supply matter, where you've got a supplier that's in one part of the country, a client in an entirely different part of the country, and a mediator in a further part of the country. So it works well. It gives you that flexibility. Mediation, by its very nature, varies. Sometimes you're trying to just get a settlement, which is a cash settlement. Sometimes you're trying to repair a relationship. Sometimes you're trying to organize a communication strategy for the future. So in the employment context, you may be fixing what's right in front of you, but quite a lot of the employment mediations are communication breakdowns. So it's not just a matter of fixing the matter as of today, it's developing a strategy that works for the future. But equally, a mediation might just be a cash settlement. It might effectively be a horse trade. And are you really going to drag a busy executive to a half-day mediation in a different location when it's just pounds, shillings, and pence, and they're just trying to carve it up? You might be able to join as a busy executive for a short period and cut a deal. So that's where it can work very well. Urgent disputes, another one. You know, everybody's diaries are very complicated and difficult to agree. And I've dealt with this many, many times when I've tried to schedule mediations. You find a date and then somebody says, oh no, I can't do that, or I'm not available at this time, or I was available and now I'm no longer available. So it can be an absolute nightmare. So when you've got an urgent dispute, having an online mediation gives you a great deal of flexibility. You can do it at different times. You can be sensible about it. Some of you will be familiar with the civil procedure rules, which date back to the early noughties under what were the Wolf reforms. And one of the key drivers in the Wolf reforms was what's known as proportionality. So when you've got a low-value dispute, do you really want to engage in hotel bills, travel costs, room rental, all of those sort of criteria? Online mediation works for low-value disputes very effectively because it's cheap and because it's proportional to the dispute. And one of the things that we need to keep in mind is proportionality. We're not far here from the Royal Courts of Justice. And how many times have you walked past the Royal Courts of Justice or seen on TV people lugging great big suitcases full of documents up steps? It's usually somebody quite young, quite junior, where all the barristers in their regalia walk on and someone's dragging these huge volumes of documents up the steps. Online mediation avoids that. You can have your computer on, you can have your documents ready, you can have the access immediately. It's very effective. And one of the other key criteria is convenience and accessibility. We sort of alluded to that with the comments from the lady earlier. But it's not just about convenience, accessibility. You might be disabled. If you're disabled, traveling can be a challenge. You might want to be able to join the mediation in your underpants. And have your camera turned off, thankfully, hopefully have your camera turned off. But it allows you to do that. People who may struggle with communication might be much better suited to an online environment. And one of the areas which we're quite keen on with Mediator Locator is understanding people who are neurodivergent. And a number of the mediators on our panel, which is now up to about 35 mediators, are trained with in neurodivergent awareness practices. And that training was in conjunction with the Brain Charity, one of the country's leading neurodiversity charities. And people might be more comfortable just sitting in their living room or sitting on their bed with their camera turned off, communicating via the computer. It just needs to have an environment where the process fits the dispute and fits the needs of the parties. And I think I'd end on this slide by simply saying this. Sometimes the simplest route is really the best route. And I like to keep my life simple. And I think if you keep it simple, it's just a lot easier to manage. And I think mediation is the same. When does it not really succeed? Well, you'll be familiar with these criteria. High emotion. Quite often, when people are in a mediation, they're not just trying to resolve a dispute, they might be trying to resolve a rift, particularly the employment context, particularly in the business context. If you've got a shareholder environment, there's rifts, and it's not just about understanding the other party's view. It's about seeing them in action. It's about living their experience. And I think there's that phrase, hearing their truth. And I think if you're in person, it's a lot easier to do that. It's much more convenient to read the non-verbal cues. And I think I'm right in saying that non-verbal communication accounts for something in the order of 80+% of our strategy of communication. When you're online, it's very difficult to read those non-verbal cues. When you've got people who've got complex personalities, you may need to be in the room. You may need to understand that, not just for the parties, but for the mediator themselves, to get a sense of who they are. And quite often within mediation, there comes a point in the day where you get this inflection point. You might have a mediation which is very challenging, very demanding, very draining emotionally. And you're thinking to yourself, are we going to get there? And sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Online may be very difficult, but you sometimes get this inflection point, which is a very subtle non-verbal cue where someone just tilts their head in a different way, or they look in a different way, or they just think about something differently. And that can be the catalyst that takes you from not having a chance of resolution to getting the matter over the line and getting a settlement. And settlement is the goal. So being in person allows you to read the room, allows you to assess people, and to understand the non-verbal cues much more effectively. Sometimes the format itself is the obstacle. Sometimes being in the same room is better. I mean, we have a conference this afternoon. How many of you are joining online? A significant proportion. People are in person. What's better? What's best? Sometimes being online is all you're able to do because you might not have the time to attend. And you might not necessarily listen to all of the talks, but you only listen to one or two, perhaps the one at 2:40 on a graveyard shift in a conference in the afternoon. The best talk of the day, some people might say. I don't know. Maybe I'm biased. But it allows you that flexibility. But equally, by being here in person, I've met a lot of people today, and hopefully I will meet a lot more people after the talk. Come and chat to us. We'd be delighted to speak with you, tell you a little bit more about who we are and what we do. But that in-person relationship builds bridges. It helps you understand what key issues are relevant to people, and it just builds relationships. So sometimes people need to be in the same room, and that's really my fundamental message on that point. Matt very kindly introduced a little bit about technology. Now, I don't want to say too much about it, just a few words. But technology has been fantastic in many respects. I know when we started, there was worries that perhaps the technology would fail, we wouldn't get the breakout rooms right, we wouldn't have a reliable, secure internet connection, etc., etc. But my experience is the technology generally works pretty well. It's not the technology that's the trouble, it's the operator. And quite often, I'm the operator, and quite often mistakes happen. But if you prepare carefully and thoroughly, you can overcome those problems. And it can work very, very effectively. Digital bundles, and I use quite a lot of AI now. Quite often when you get a large volume of documents, it's very easy just to dump them into AI and say, could you please give me a synopsis of the information? What do I need to focus on? And it can filter out. Particularly when you get cases where people are very emotionally charged, they might have a very long, detailed statement. And a lot of the information within that statement, whilst it's important to understand it, it might not be relevant to the core issues that you're facing. And it's important to drill down to those core issues. And technology is very effective at helping you do that. It's not a substitute, and I absolutely wouldn't suggest for one moment. We're all social beings, we're social creatures, we like to interact, and mediation is a fundamentally human experience. But used in conjunction with that human experience, I feel that technology has its place and it can be very valuable. And I talked about the virtual breakout rooms. They can be very effective, and the mediator can jump between the rooms, bring parties together, and it can all work pretty seamlessly if you're relatively familiar with the process. Assuming you get through your online mediation successfully and the mediator's done a good job, hopefully you get to that fantastic point where you've reached a settlement. Now that settlement can come in different forms. It could be in the form of a heads of terms, or if it's a more simplistic settlement, maybe the mediator will help the parties draw it up. Mediators obviously have to be careful. We're not there to draw up the terms of the settlement because we represent the parties in a neutral and impartial way. You cannot be seen to be partisan. But if you do get heads of terms or you do get an agreement, you might want to sign it there and then. And quite often, in my experience, if you're dealing with a mediation which has run late into the evening, if you get a deal, sign it there and then, because quite often people wake up the next morning and reflect and they're like, oh, I'm not so sure. So see if you can nail it down there and then. Believe you me, it will save you time. And I think a good quality mediator will design the heads of terms to be fairly comprehensive, because I do legal work as well. I sometimes get involved in drawing up settlements, and I see the difference between what I consider a really good mediator and a not so good mediator in the settlement itself. Have they nailed down all the points? Because quite often, if you're doing the settlement agreement, you effectively may have to reopen issues and remediate matters, and you really don't want to be doing that. So a good mediator will get the settlement drawn up comprehensively, get the parties to initially sign it so that you've got your deal, because you've put a lot of effort into that mediation. You don't want to lose it on a technical point. And obviously, when you're online, you can use your sharing function. It really is really helpful. And I think one of the worst things about online mediation is the situation where there's that button in the top right corner which says leave. When I do mediations, I know a lot of people do this as well, I often say to the parties, if you get to that point where you're just sick of the sight of everybody and you want to leave, please just give me 10 or 15 minutes to chat to you so I can understand what's going on and maybe refocus you and try to help you get there. And I think, you know, technology is great, it allows us to mediate, but when you can just leave by pushing that button, it can be very dangerous. So sometimes it does go over the crossbar. But it is a pretty decent system, and I'm a fan of it in the right place. So the question is changing formation. Is it online? Is it in person? Which is best? I think the answer, as I said, is nuanced. Everyone has its place. Online can be really effective. Face-to-face, I think, is generally more effective because I think people are often more invested when they're face-to-face. But, you know, we live in the real world and face-to-face is not always possible. Online offers a very good, flexible alternative. And then hybrid mediation. Again, if I could ask the question, how many people have been involved in a hybrid mediation? Okay, very good. I probably should ask the question the other way around. How many people know what a hybrid mediation is? Okay, so hybrid mediation is when, as the name suggests, it's a mixture. And we've been involved with Mediator Locator in quite a few hybrid mediations where you've got parties who are not necessarily familiar with the tech, but they'll go to their legal representatives' offices, they'll sit with their solicitor and do the mediation online, but with somebody that helps them through the process. And you can have people around the country doing this, but they have support from somebody with them. So they're not sat remotely in their bedroom or in their kitchen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of practical examples where different styles of mediation have worked well. So I was involved a little while ago in a commercial dispute. For the property lawyers amongst you, you may understand what I mean by a Section 20 major works claim. And what this is when you have a housing association that wants to do major repairs to one of their buildings, which the tenants have to pay for, they issue this notice to say, here's a big bill, you need to pay your share, can we have our money please? And of course, a lot of people in housing association simply don't have the money. And the one I was involved in, it was a block of flats, and they were going to replace the roof, and the roof was about £250,000, and there was about 25 tenants, so it was going to be roughly £10,000 per tenant for the fixing of the roof. And they just couldn't afford it, and they were horrified that they were going to receive this huge bill. The housing association wanted to fix the roof. Not an unreasonable proposition. But what tends to happen in these cases is the tenants say the reason the roof's in such a dreadful state of repair is because you, housing association, have failed to manage it properly. And it's your bad conduct that has caused the roof to deteriorate. And then when they ask for the records, generally speaking, the roof hasn't been well maintained, so they have a good point. But on the flip side, the social housing company want a new roof, and it's in everybody's interest to get a new roof, so it's a perfect candidate for mediation. We had 25 tenants on one side, we had 3 people from the housing association on the other side, and me in the middle, all remote. And it worked very effectively, and we managed to get a settlement. For the 25 people, I guess they may have seen each other around their building, but they probably didn't know each other. And we identified one person to act as the spokesperson, but everybody was involved. And in fact, one guy spent the entire mediation sat in the background of the screen in his shorts and sliders smoking a joint. So for him, it worked really effectively. Thankfully, he didn't say very much. But the online environment allows you to do that if you want to in the comfort of your own home. I don't suppose you could have a joint with you if you're in a solicitor's office negotiating a mediation. It worked very effectively. Conversely, we had a situation with an in-person mediation on an employment matter where a manager and an employee had fallen out. And I think quite often when you're dealing with people who are going to continue to be related work-wise going forward, it is well advised to do an in-person mediation if you can, because it's not just a matter of fixing the issue that's right in front of you, it's a matter of developing communication strategies that are going to be effective for the future. So face-to-face worked very effectively. It allowed the people to understand the particular personalities better and what was driving some of the miscommunications that were in existence. It allowed everybody to rebuild trust in a safe, secure, and controlled environment. And ultimately, for the future, it led to better conversations. So it really worked very effectively. I don't think we would have achieved the outcome that we did had we been online. And then the final environment, hybrid, which I mentioned a few moments ago, this particular one, it was an elderly couple. It was an inheritance dispute. A sibling had passed away and left money to one sibling, and that sibling was going to inherit, but another sibling was aggrieved that they weren't included in the will. It was a mediation that one of the mediators who's with us today was involved in. He was based up in Liverpool. The other party was based down in Colchester, and I forget where the third party was, but it was two elderly people who weren't particularly fit, so they went to the firm and solicitors' offices. The solicitors did all the tech for them, and it worked very effectively. So they wouldn't have been comfortable going in and out of breakout rooms from their living room, but the solicitors managed the process in a hybrid environment, and ultimately they got a settlement. So it was really, really effective. And if there's one thing we've learned through Mediator Locator, is that successful mediations rarely follow standard formulas. So choosing the winning formation. Great managers don't have a favorite formation. They want to win. And in our environment, a win is a settlement. And you've got to understand the dispute. You've got to choose the system most likely to succeed. And obviously, there's other criteria up there. I won't repeat them. You're able to read them for yourself. But there's no universally best format. The winning formation is the one that gives this particular dispute the best chance of settlement. And that is ultimately our goal, and that's what we're here for. That's what we're trying to achieve. And I think being clever about it is very, very sensible. Don't just necessarily default to the easy solution. I'd like to go on to say it's not just about choosing the right format, it's about choosing the right mediator too. And the right mediator can be sometimes more important than the format. You've got to look at their experience, the style, their knowledge. Now, the mediators we work with, most of them are partners in law firms. They're all working day to day in the sectors in which they mediate. So they are specialists and they have that legal knowledge and framework. They can bring that to the table and really help parties get over the line. We work with a lot of HR professionals as well. They have that sector specialism. They can bring it along the line. And they have a track record. They're quality people. They can adapt. And quite a lot of them are also neurodiversity aware mediators through this training association we have with the Brain Charity. So they've been through formal training, so they can deal with people. They can understand sensitivities about sensory overload, the need to take breaks, different formats like written information, even these fidget boxes that some people who are neurodivergent find very helpful. And we work with one particular trainer from the Brain Charity who, whilst doing the training with us, constantly is knitting. And that's one of her particular characteristics. It just helps her relax. She's a fantastic trainer, really effective, but the knitting is always going on the whole time. So it's quite interesting. So you adapt the process to meet the requirements of the people. And being, I think, neurodiverse aware, bearing in mind 1 in 7 of us have neurodivergent tendencies, is very, very important. And it can be the difference between getting a resolution and missing and shooting over the goal. So preparation wins matches. Understand what you're hoping to achieve in your mediation, get the authority to settle, understand the various interests. And this is really important. And we take a lot of time and organisation and preparation to make sure we fully understand the mediation. All of our mediators do proper present preparation. And at Mediator Locator, we've took such a lot of stock in being well prepared that we've created the resolution pathway, which is a system we operate for our mediators to help you get better prepared for your mediation, manage expectations, understand risk matrices, do dispute summaries, know what's going to happen on the day, how the mediator is going to operate in their particular style. And it will help you get the best chance of settlement. And I think there's a real truism here. Great mediations rarely happen by accident. It's the resolution pathway, I think, which helps you get across the line. So let's sum up. Let's look at our report card and our scores at the end of the match. Full-time whistle. Online, 5 stars or 5 footballs. Face-to-face, same, hybrid. I think it's clear there's no winner in this scenario. The process has to adapt to meet the requirements of the dispute. And that's my fundamental message. And done well and done effectively, it can make mediation even more powerful. It's already a fabulous tool. A lot of people have talked about their passion in mediation. I share that. And done right and done well, it's probably the most powerful form of dispute resolution out there. So I'm going to conclude by saying the final slide. People often say to me, do you believe in online mediation? Let's reframe the question. I think the better question is to say which process gives this dispute best chance of resolution. Settlement is the goal. Online is simply one of the options, and the process should adapt to fit the dispute. Hopefully that's been of interest and value, and if you'd like to talk further, I'm at my stand. I'd be delighted to chat to you. Thank you very much.
Just stay for 1 sec. Thank you very much for living up to that billing of it being fascinating, because it was fascinating. Just very few quick-fire questions. You were surprised by how few people held their hands up as having been involved in online mediation. Do you have a sense at the moment of where we are in terms of the proportions, percentages?
I would say from the mediations we're involved in, it's almost 50-50.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people like it, and we get involved in a lot of employment and also commercial mediations. And I think particularly in the commercial environment, people do like online. I think sometimes it can be more about just getting a financial settlement. So a 50-50, but as I said, quite often it's a lot more than just money, and I think in person has its place.
And have you noticed that the process of online mediation has improved since the new wave of the pandemic?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's got much more slick. People are much more comfortable being online. They're much more familiar with the process and how it operates. So yeah, it offers another option of flexibility, which is at the core of mediation.
Do you think people tend to be more honest when they're in person or when they're online as far as mediation is concerned?
That's a great question, actually. I think people want, when they understand mediation and they get to realize that you can be candid with the mediator. I think when people start out, they hold their cards quite close to their chest. But the reality is you can tell the mediator anything, because the mediator will not reveal any information without the express permission of the parties. So I think when you're in person, when you meet the mediator and the parties get together, they can understand each other's requirements a little bit more and perhaps be more candid. But I don't think people are perhaps less honest. I think everybody that goes to mediation has a vested interest in getting a settlement and getting it over the line. But I think people tend to be more open more quickly in person.
And final question, if England do get past DR Congo tomorrow evening, what chance do you think we have against Mexico, in Mexico City, at altitude and in the heat?
So I think the core message is to adapt the format for the particular requirements. I think the hydration breaks are very important, particularly in a hot environment. I've watched international football over my whole lifetime, and England start slow, get better, look good, and then go out ignominiously on penalties. So long as it doesn't happen against Mexico in a few days' time, then I'll be happy. It would be nice for once. I mean, 1966, it would be nice for once to bring it home, but I've lived too long. I'm too long in the tooth. I suspect the answer is we'll go out on penalties ignominiously. And then they can do an advert with the guys with their hoods on, can't they, sat in Pizza Hut, talking about how they missed their penalties, if you remember the advert.
I do very well. Painful memories. Stuart Lawrence, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, everybody.